Thanks for joining in. All right, so we're gonna get started in a bit. So thanks everyone. I am Sabrina. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Calm Collective Asia. And we are normalizing mental health conversations in Asia and at the workplaces. So today we're gonna be talking about how to thrive under pressure. And we have some really amazing folks on the panel. So if, before we get started, you can share with us where you're tuning in from. Are you in Singapore? Are you somewhere around the region? And before we get started, I just want to let you know that we have an in-person talk on Saturday, 27th of August, on turning imposter syndrome into your strength. So this is going to be pretty exciting. It's our first in-person talk. And we're going to be at the Temasek Shop House near Dhoby Ghaut in Singapore this Saturday. And another thing that's coming up is actually CalmCon, our Wellbeing and Mental Health Festival, that's happening between the 6th to 9th of October ahead of World Mental Health Day. So, all right, Singapore. Is that Philippines? Cool. All right, so this topic is, really, really close to my heart. As an entrepreneur and manager, it means that there's a lot of responsibilities to bear, from keeping the organization running smoothly to ensuring that our people are well taken care of. And frankly, it can be pretty overwhelming sometimes. So I really am looking forward to learning to the folks we have on the panel about how they thrive under pressure. And, all of them have had experience operating in high stress environments. They're all really high achieving, and they have learned how to build resilience to thrive under pressure. So whether you're a university student dealing with tight deadlines or demands from your boss, or maybe you're a people leader who's under pressure to deliver business outcomes, I'm sure that there's something every one of us will learn from our speakers today. So, all right, today we have Joseph, who is the executive director of sales and marketing at Otis Asia Pacific. We also have Shulin, who's the founder of her own search firm, Answer Search. And we have Tristan, who is in the group COO office of C, and he's doing people and organizational strategy over there. So I'm going to invite everyone to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started on our conversation proper. So maybe Joe, could you start first? Introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure, Sabrina. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Pretty excited about the panel today, and actually hearing from my fellow counterparts as well to speak about how they deal with pressures. But Joe Armis, and I work for Otis Asia Pacific, which is the elevator company, and I oversee sales and marketing all over Asia, basically all Asia ex China. And I've been in this industry for about 18 years, but prior to that, I spent about 6.5 years in the U.S. Army, and I did that coming right out of university. And so definitely had a lot of experience, with the subject matter today, and could always go on with stories and such. But I think it's important to kind of learn from each other and to hear, how we've all challenged ourselves to deal with different pressures throughout. And certainly I've learned a lot along the way too. So happy to be a part of that today to share that.
Thank you so much, Joe. All right, over to you, Shulin.
Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to meet Joe and Tristan for the first time. And thanks, Sabrina, for having me. So I was a lawyer turned legal recruiter. So I find jobs for lawyers, and that's what I've been doing for the last 12 years. And I started my own legal recruitment firm 6 years ago. And I'm also a mom to 2 boys, 3 and 6 years old. So fun fact, the older son is 6 years old. My company is also 6 years old. So you can imagine when I first started, I had 2 babies. Both are still growing, but it was a very intense period of my life. I'm also a podcast host. I started my podcast called After the Bar just early this year. So, I like to try new things, and actually something very big on my agenda for my small team, small company is mental well-being. So thanks. I'm very excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Then I can only imagine juggling all of that and having two babies at once. So,
Don't
yeah,
recommend.
yeah, okay. Tristan, over to you. Please
Uh,
share about yourself.
Hey everybody, name is Tristan. I'm originally from New York. My mom is from Cleveland with Russian and Czech roots. My dad is from Jamaica. So no ties with no ties in Singapore from a family perspective, but I've been very kind of happy to call it home for the past, it's been a little over 3 years at this point. I had started my career out at Morgan Stanley within investment banking, but then moved around a variety of different roles. So also spent time in sales and trading, in an internal strategy role, helping launch a business to increase revenue with Asian, Black, and Hispanic clients, and then a little bit of time on the human capital side as well. After Morgan Stanley, I went to Harvard to get my MBA, focused largely on organizational behavior while I was there. One of the highlights, which I think is relevant for the conversation today, was kind of co-creating a course with one of the professors called Crafting Your Life, which was designed to help MBA students live with greater intentionality, which I think will be a big part of the conversation. I think intentionality will be a big part of the conversation today. And then after business school, came over to Singapore, joined the Boston Consulting Group, first as a consultant covering financial services and tech media telecom. And then after that experience, within a role where I helped launch our Leadership Institute, which is basically an executive education offering for our Asia Pacific clients. And then very recently, about 4 months ago, moved over to C as a part of the co-founder and COO office, where I'm leading people and organizational strategy. So very much looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, I'm super excited because everyone has such diverse backgrounds, and I think even for me, I've got so much to learn from you. So, all right. Okay, and just someone in the chat. So, yeah, if anyone of you have any questions at any point in time, you can always drop it into the Q&A panel or the box, and we will try our best to get to them towards the end of the conversation. So, okay, so now we want to begin to just kind of unpack pressure a little bit, right? So we want to talk about thriving under pressure, but let's talk about being under pressure first. So I think to a lot of us, pressure in the work environment, it comes from so many different sources, but typically it shows up as stress or burnout even, right? So we're experiencing and also talking a lot more about this especially in the recent times, given the pandemic and given all the changes that we've been facing. So I wanted to just understand from a more environmental aspect, right? Whether maybe Joe or Sholin, have you seen this manifesting in the teams that you're managing? And how have you helped them to alleviate that stress? Maybe Joe, would you like
Yeah,
to go
I'll,
first?
I'll
Yeah,
start, Sabrina.
yeah.
Well, I think it's for sure we've seen this manifest in my teams and such, and also, the last 3 years, I was actually working in Hong Kong as the head of our the Otis group in Hong Kong, and certainly during that time when that went through the protests that were going on, and then right into COVID for 2 years, a lot of external pressures that the teams were experiencing, and then just with the pandemic environment, the work from home shift created a lot of stressors in the sense that it changed the way we interacted with each other, and we tended to, you could see the stress piling up with meetings, because now you had to schedule a meeting to talk to somebody even for 15 minutes. So then it's, hey, let's look at everyone's calendar. Oh, you have a free spot, and then something pops up, and so a lot of people were feeling burnout pretty quick, because of that, and so we had to react to that. We had to recognize what was going on, what kind of we were doing to ourselves in terms of our work pace and our work atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
and then really as leaders step in to say, okay, how can we alleviate some of these pressures, because a lot of it was being self-created from that standpoint. Just because the opportunity was there doesn't mean we had to take it. and so it's all about a lot of the basics of reprioritizing what's important from a work standpoint, from a personal standpoint. And with everybody experiencing kind of a lockdown situation or isolation situation, we had to take time for ourselves, and you couldn't do that in traditional ways. So you've seen a lot of the ways these things came up virtually, with virtual happy hours, things like that. And so implementing a lot of that into the work culture, was a big part of how we dealt with that. But definitely, I've seen the transition of how, the external environment can impact, the stresses. And that's not talking about work stress, just our own deadlines and presentations and work requirements that we have to do. It's basically, you have to take it as a whole. You can't really separate everything, because what happens in your personal life will impact your work, and vice versa. And so those stressors have to be taken as a whole, and then really addressed, widely between the both of them, and such. So, but yeah, I mean that, and right away I can see how that's manifested right away.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point you brought up as well, that it's not just about the internal deadlines you're facing, or like maybe stress from colleagues or your bosses. It's really about looking at the individual's full situation, right? Like
Correct.
obviously we all went through all the changes with lockdown, work from home, work from whatever now these
Right.
days.
Right.
But it's really about understanding that pressure doesn't only come from work, right? It's really about the individual's entire life. Tristan, did you see any of these changes over the past couple of years? How was it for you? Have you been seeing
Yeah,
more stress happening?
Yeah, I definitely saw changes, and I think to kind of build on top of what Joe had mentioned, given the change in the way that we were doing work, I feel like that also meant a lot of needing to, for me personally, needing to change the way that my routines were done. And I'm a very routine-oriented person, so I think one of the things that causes me stress is when like something makes it not possible for me to go through my normal routines, which COVID certainly did for myself and did for many, if not everybody, in terms of just how the normal flow of work was. So I think I did notice, and I was moving to a new country, moving to a new company, moving to an entirely new different type of work, and then COVID happened all at the same time. So I would say that in many ways it was an example of peak stress for me. And I think that wherever there's a downside, there's always an opportunity. And I think the opportunity here was because it caused me to break all of the habits that I was so used to. It then gave me a blank canvas to rebuild healthy habits from scratch. So I would say it was a very difficult few years, but on the back end of it, I feel like I've been able to design the way that I want to live my life a little bit more than I would have been able to do before COVID. So I was able to kind of reframe it into an opportunity, but definitely the change in the ways that work got done is something that I found very stressful.
I mean, yeah, I think all of us experience that, and I think we want to understand a bit more also about how else this pressure has shown up in your professional life, or even if it spills over into other parts. We'd love to dig into that.
Mhm.
Maybe Shulin, could I ask you a bit more about
Sure.
how pressure has shown up in your professional life, and at what point did you experience peak stress, and
Okay.
how did it feel?
Cool. So many examples have come to my mind, but I'm going to just share a little bit because Tristan and Joseph have both touched on it about the different types of stressors. So I think a lot of it can come from the company culture. It comes from the demands of the manager and also the individual. Like what's the story I'm telling myself when something happens? As managers, there are things which are within and not within my control. So I'm a business owner. Company culture, to the extent that I can influence it, is within my control. Okay. Managers below me, they are somewhat within my control. But the individuals, we have very different, very little control over how they take on stress. They might internalize it, they might not say it. And I think one of you touched on it. It is perceived stress versus real stress. Because a lot of times we all have different tolerance levels. So I'm very mindful of that, given that my team is small. I mean, my company headcount size is 8. I mean, it's smaller than Tristan and Joseph's teams for sure. So, I mean, I have the luxury of digging deeper as to whether, a particular person is actually thriving or just surviving. Because frankly, I don't want that. I don't want to have someone come in and dread working. And going back to your other question about peak stress, I think it's when I just had my baby and I started my company. You guys must be thinking, what was I thinking? So I wasn't thinking, clearly. I mean, the baby was not really planned, to be honest. The company was planned. So regretfully, I focused my energies on the company because I felt like this is within my control. Work is, like an escape from the stress at home. But because of that, it brought a different kind of pressure. And well, I mean, we can talk about the coping mechanisms. And I mean, I did share with Sabrina this morning that I just started seeing a therapist. First session 2 weeks ago, game changer. I think it's the best gift I gave myself. But more on that later. Thanks.
Yeah, sure then. I mean, wow. Okay, that was a lot to that we can, dig deeper into. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you kind of outline the different ways we can look at stress, right? There's like perceived stress, real stress. What is stress really, right? Is it a mindset thing? Is it a thing that we can control? I think that's something we can definitely talk more on. And then around like stress tolerance levels, right? Like I think at different times in our life, we are also able to take on more stress or less, right? Depending on what else we're facing in our lives, whether we're used to dealing with that amount of stress. Um, and then finally, you mentioned about oh my goodness, yeah, having the your baby and the business at the same time. That's something that I've also like thought about, and I'm not a mother, but I'm very intimidated by that idea. So yeah, Shirley, thanks for
We can
sharing.
have coffee next time, Sabrina.
We will talk about it. This is only part like one of many. So in terms of pressure and how that's shown up in terms of like peak stress moments, right? Joe, I would love to learn more about how that's shown up for you and how did you feel when you experienced that like
Yeah,
really stressful moment.
I mean, it's kind of when I kind of saw a preview of that question, it's more of a kind of a reflection, like how
Yeah.
what was a peak stress moment, and I can say that there's not a single moment that was a peak stress. I would say it's a series of experiences, and really it relates to any time I was embarking on something new.
Mm.
Probably the peak stress. So going to university from high school, was a peak stress moment, and the expectations and challenges that brought. Graduating from university, going into the army, whole new experience. Leading people, new countries, this and that. Not having any context of what I was getting into, and then transitioning from the army to the corporate world.
Mm.
Now I'm going from one ecosystem that I was comfortable in, and jumping into another, and really embarking on a new career. And then really any new position that that I was able to progress in, at Otis throughout my career. When you often experience a promotion or a change in job or even a relocation, those moments in time, all were, I would say a peak stress moment, because you're balancing everything. You're balancing, again, your personal situation, you're balancing the actual situation, whether it's work or university, or or a new city.
Mhm.
And Tristan touched on it, coming into a new city, not knowing anybody, maybe not having
Yeah.
your resources available. These are all things that you have to worry about. You're not only do you have to probably meet your new team at work, you got to, like for me, when I came to Singapore, I got to set up utilities, I got to figure out how to get internet, and then there's meetings going on. Do I need to take it at the office? Do I go? Yeah, it just, there's a lot of things you're balancing, and so I think every time those moments where you're trying to deal with something new,
Mm.
that kind of ties in everything, is a peak stress moment.
Yeah.
And and later, we can, we'll talk about some of the ways that I had to deal with that. But those contexts definitely showed up. When I look at
Mm.
what caused those stresses.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, it's great that you brought it up that way as well. And I know that for many people, myself included, these transitions in life, going into new chapters, new changes, it's
Yeah,
yeah, it always brings about some form of stress, and it's when there are more factors that you feel like, oh my God, you can't really control, or there's just
right.
so many new things going on. It's hard, right? It's hard. And you also mentioned like having that support structure to, kind of lean on, right? Yeah. Tristan, does any of that resonate with you? How has,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
how stress come up for you?
a lot of it resonates. And I think what I love about the question, and as I reflect on it, I feel like for everybody, will manifest itself differently. So I think what I found very helpful over time is to recognize what my signs of being stressed are. So for me, it's things like I have a very difficult time getting out of bed in the morning. So I'll snooze my alarm clock more than I normally would, or I'll take extra long when I'm in the shower. So I'll just you know what, my responsibilities can't catch me if I'm in here, or I will and then there's other things that maybe have a bit more serious implications, like sometimes I'll, forget a meal or something like
Mm,
that, and I won't realize until the end of the day, or I won't realize until it's like 3 p.m., 4 p.m., and I have a headache, and I'll be like, wait, why do I have a headache right now? And then I'll replay the day and I'll realize that I haven't actually had lunch. So I think that everybody has these different things in their life that will manifest themselves. And what I found really helpful is even by knowing the signs, I think allows you to spot periods. So you can
mm,
basically identify that you're heading into a period of stress, which allows you to make changes. Things like when I'm heading into a period that I know is stressful based on these signs, I might pull back on some of the, social gatherings that I have. And that works for me because I'm an introvert. So I do a good job of basically de-stressing by myself, as opposed to in larger social environments. And things like another thing is in addition to knowing these, I found it really helpful to actually share what some of these signs of stress are with people that I'm close with. So I actually have a Google Doc that I've shared with my partner, and I will kind of like that just lists out the things that stress me out, and in
wow.
particular as it relates to travel, as an example, is
Yeah.
something that, even though I've traveled a lot and I love to travel, whether it's for work or pleasure, it's something that stresses me out. So I have a document that basically, which is a shared doc with my partner. And it's all the things that like stress me out when it comes to travel, and all of the little things that I can do to basically be less stressed.
So
Things
that's like
like
a
printing itinerary.
guide to managing Tristan, pretty much.
Yeah, correct. And I mean, she has her stressors that she puts in the document as well. Her list is a lot shorter than my list, but but I think that in general, it's a good mechanism for just being aware of it, and then sharing it with other people,
Mm,
which helps set up a support system so that you don't have to go through the difficult period on your own, but you can bring other people into that as well. So I think that's for me, a big part of it is just really
yeah.
spotting it and then coming up with solutions to address
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Oh, and I'm so inspired. I'm gonna go do that as well. This is my guide, friends. Like, in case I break down, in case, yeah, call me, whatever. So, no, that's really cool. And I think one thing that you brought up as well, Tristan, was around like how stress looks different for each person, and the way that we react also or respond looks different for each person, right? You talked about the showers and snoozing, as well as missing meals, right? And then it might
Hmm.
look completely different for someone else. So, Shulin or Joe, are you aware of what those early signs look like for you, Shulin?
I'm very thankful that Tristan has shared that, because my husband has on many occasions stayed in the shower for way too long and missed. So now I know. Now I know. It's his way of escape. But I mean, I can see that it's really nice to, be by yourself. So I'm the opposite of my husband. Like, my husband's an introvert, I'm an extrovert. And I'm gonna take that tip. And I'm so curious what goes into that list, Tristan. Like, do you mean like because, okay, for instance, a pet peeve of mine when I travel, I need like a nice hotel and nice toilets. Is that what goes into that list? What?
Yeah, there is a section that is basically travel reminders, that like what I look like, what helps me in accommodations, and then it's little things like
Ah,
packing. It's also very structured, so it's like, I basically pack my bags 48 hours before the
yeah,
flight. I have a written out like list of everything that I need to put into my bag.
I see.
It's little things like that, and it's just reminders, so
Oh,
that it's like a checklist of what I
yeah.
need to do before I travel.
That's interesting, Tristan. You say that because I'm the same way. I want to pack ahead of time, and it stresses my wife out because I'm saying you need a pack now as well. And she's a last minute packer. And
Oh, man.
so my
Sounds like
way
me.
of dealing
Sounds like
stress with stress is causing stress for her. So
Yeah, so my husband has the same list, and he stresses me out. He packs like a week in advance. I'm not kidding. And then I'm like, last minute, I'll go to Watson's and buy whatever I need. But sorry, back to your question. What was your question?
I'm just enjoying this.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead. What was the question?
no, well, I think part of it was like what we do to, and I just want to highlight,
Yeah.
take it back that I think it is important, as Tristan mentioned, that you do have to recognize, what your reactions are, to stress that is happening.
Mhm.
It's really important as you find yourself in situations that, when you're in a stressful situation, that what you do, will allow you to handle that in a positive way. And so, if it means that, look, I got to take a break and just sleep for 15 more minutes to kind of
Yeah.
get ready for what I have ahead, you recognize those things that will help you deal with these situations as they come up. And I think it's important. And then what it'll do, and I'll probably talk about it later, is that you got to build a habit, because dealing with stress is not something that you just naturally do, right? And it comes over time, and it comes over dealing with situations as they come up. And then you learn to have a habit of having to deal with a stressful situation, or when it comes up, and it may not even be stressful at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think you're so right in talking and saying that it's really a habit. We're not born knowing how to deal with stress, right? Like, and as the years go by, we end up taking on new responsibilities and experiencing new things. So we couldn't possibly be naturally geared for that. So it really is it's a habit. So yeah, actually that kind of goes into the next part of the conversation, which is so now that I guess we agree that there's always going to be pressure, there's always going to be stress. So how might we thrive under pressure? What does thriving actually look like? Shulin, would you like to go first?
Okay, sure. So I've actually been working with a coach, and the first thing I think she's in episode 3 of my podcast, Susan De Silva. So when I interviewed her, she said, Shulin, words like resilience and tenacity and all this just makes it sound so hard. She said, we can do better than surviving. We should be thriving. So how thriving looks like in my world, because I interview stressed out lawyers all the time, people usually reach a breaking point and therefore they want to look for a new job. And I always question, is there something that can be done? Can you still stay? Because the last thing I want is to put the person through a battery of interviews, then they get a counter offer and they stay. So I that's actually like a hack for me. I want to ask them whether there's anything your manager can do to rectify this. Have you reached the point of no return? So I think how thriving looks for me in the workplace is when a manager actually has constant communication with their team members, doesn't make any assumptions about what's happening in that person's world, and the employees as well as the managers feel like they can perform at their maximum levels of productivity, and they feel fulfilled. They feel like everyone's rowing in the same direction, and we are making a difference. This is not just a job. We're not just here for a paycheck. And I'm very happy to say, to the extent that I know, my team, we are in that space. We are in that headspace, but it's not something that I ever take for granted. It's something I constantly check in. And I think one thing about thriving in the workplace, which I find personally very helpful, is when things go wrong, as a manager, we cannot go on a fault-finding mission. I must say, 2 years ago, before COVID, I was the person, when things go wrong, I'm looking for someone to blame. Okay, whether it's myself or someone, I'm just going to blame someone. Okay, it was my default setting. So I've had to unlearn that. And because of that, I feel like my team members, they feel this is a safe space. Even if I make a mistake, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that I'm not thriving. Okay, we're humans, we make mistakes. So when a mistake happens, what then? Not a fault-finding mission. Own up, take responsibility. I don't want a fearful environment where people are trying to hide things. They don't dare to tell me something has gone wrong. So that to me is,
Mm.
I think I've covered.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Shirley, what you're saying is that like the environment and the support
Yeah.
systems around you, your manager really does affect whether one can survive or thrive under that pressure,
Yeah.
right? Like even though this pressure, is there a way to enable the person to get through it in a way that's a bit more smooth sailing, more empowering rather than disempowering, right? So
Yes.
yeah, Joseph, would you like to share
Yeah,
your
sure. I mean,
thoughts?
thriving under pressure for me, it means that you're able to just go through the day without actually feeling stressed. Because regardless, there's always something going on. There's always something tugging at you. Oh, I got to call my mom. I haven't talked to her in a month or a week. And then there's a deadline coming. There's somebody I needed to reach out to. These kind of things are always nagging at you, and it compounds into other things. And so it's just how you deal with it. And this is where we talked about the habit. This is a skill. When a lot of times, some people, when I talk to a friend of mine, he wakes up in the morning and he says, "Oh my God, I got to do all these 5 things. And I'm stressed out." Where I say, you got to reframe that. You got to reframe that situation where you say, you wake up in the morning, you look at your calendars that say, and there may be 10 things on there. It's okay. How can I do this better? How can I make this situation a positive situation? And that reframing is the habit building. You don't look at it as something that's going to cause you stress. You look at it as a way that you can have a positive impact in what you're doing. And again, you don't just wake up and do that. You have to build that and practice it and be conscious of it. And then over time, it just becomes as Tristan said, a routine in how you deal with situations. And so no matter what day it is, you're gonna have something every day, no matter what. And then you learn, you develop yourself a habit in how you're going to address these things throughout the day, whether it's work, whether it's personal, whether it impacts somebody else. And then over time, it's a way that you do that. And it doesn't mean that you'll never be stressed. I mean, that's not realistic to think that you'll never be stressed, but it gives you a framework, or it gives you a foundation to be able to handle that and maybe approach it, recognize when you need to reach out for resources or support to be able to deal with that. This is not meant to be a means to deal with it by yourself or individually. It's about recognition of how to deal with these situations and be comfortable doing that. And so I think reframing your mindset in that and understanding your own signs of how you react enables you to deal with it. And to me, that then you're able to thrive, because no matter the situation, you have a way that you can address it and get through it.
Yeah, Joe, I do agree with you that a lot of it is, I mean, pressure is always going to be there, and stress as well, but it's really about how we think or what our relationship is with it, right?
And Shulin said something good too about communication. I mean, especially in the workplace, even personal. I mean, having that communication is critically important. If you manage teams, if somebody's not performing, we tend to say that, they're not capable, but it could be there's a stressor that's not work related that's affecting their performance. And you would never know if you didn't take time to engage and communicate. And so that it's such a critical part, if you're leading people to understand that.
Definitely. I think reaching out is so important, and we cannot assume that people, are just struggling because of, one factor. There's always a lot more to it. Tristan, how about you? What are your thoughts around, managing pressure or, building our resilience? Is it more of a mindset thing? Do you have like some certain like practical strategies, habits, routines that you lean on?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think the mindset helps you prepare before the stress is there. And then once the actual stress is there, I think that's where the habits and routines are incredibly important. And so I think that uh, certain habits, so for me, as an example, therapy. So Shulin had mentioned therapy earlier. That's something that I find tremendously helpful. So I've been kind of going on and off to therapy for the past like 13 years or so, more on than off. At this point, I go 2 times a month. So I don't view therapy as something that people leverage only when they feel stressed out, but rather I think that proactively using therapy actually allows you to build, I think, some of the muscles and the inner awareness to deal with the stressors as they pop up. So, I kind of, if we're using a car analogy, I don't think that you bring your car in for routine maintenance. You don't wait until your car breaks down before you go to a mechanic. And in the same way, like, I don't wait until I have a breakdown of some sort to go to therapy. That's the kind of like regular maintenance that I feel like my body and my mental health needs. So that's certainly, and
Yeah.
that to me is a habit. Journaling every single day is another example of a habit that I find incredibly impactful, because when things get really stressful, it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. And I find that, like, especially with this habit of journaling very regularly, if I'm going through a stressful period and it feels like everything is falling out, all I have to do is look at the journal and flip back a few pages and say, actually, no, things are pretty good for the most part. I'm just having a bad couple of days. So the journal can be a habit that offers a lot of perspective that helps
Mm.
in the moments that are stressful. And then just leveraging any sort of, tool or support system that's available. So simple. Earlier I talked about, sometimes when I'm stressed out, I would forget a meal. Even more common than forgetting a meal, it might be like I would forget to drink water throughout the day. So, I picked up, there's this bottle called Hydrate Spark. It's in a very hot pink color, which makes it very hard to miss.
Suits you.
Yeah. But no, it's very helpful. And actually, it records the amount of water that I'm drinking throughout the day. And then if I'm below the amount of water that I should have had, it actually, the bottle lights up. And so it's an example of a little mechanism that helps remind me of habits and routines and things that I should be doing. Um, if I think Wednesday evening is going to be stressful, then I block off Wednesday afternoon and I don't do anything. And I block off Thursday
Mm.
morning and I don't do anything. And I might even, rather than just blocking it off, I might even schedule in an activity that I know will de-stress. So going for a walk, or, playing video games with my brother. Like I'll intentionally schedule something in that I know de-stresses me if I'm heading into
Mm.
something that I think might cause me a little bit of stress. So I think that for me, thriving is really having control over the habits and the routines that I need to live a healthy life. And when I'm able to do that, I feel like that's when I'm thriving the most.
No, these are all really proactive ways to kind of like manage your stress ahead of time. I think, Tristan, you mentioned therapy, journaling, and also with the water as well. And also, I think what I understood was that you also block off time, and you manage your schedule very proactively. So that's one of the things that I do as well. I always do this ahead of the week, and then even in the mornings, I'm like, do I really need to do that? And then, sometimes I end up canceling or postponing things or delegating stuff. So, like, prioritization also is something that has been really helpful with helping me manage stress. Trillian, I'd love to hear from you, whether you have any other, tips or strategies that you've
Sure.
leaned on.
I first want to acknowledge Tristan for sharing that you go for therapy twice a month. I only just started, and maybe in the Singapore Asian culture, there's a bit of stigma when it comes to therapy. Like I have like 7 or 8 coaches, so it's not like, it's expensive. Therapy is expensive, so it's not accessible to everyone. But I think I resisted going for therapy until I actually hit a bit of a breaking point. So something quite stressful, tremendously stressful happened in the last 6 to 8 months. And I was relating about it. It's over now. So intellectually, I thought I had moved on, but I was wrong. So I was sitting in a restaurant with a friend. I was telling him about it. And then I just started breaking down. And I thought, okay, this is strange, right? I thought it was a one-off incident. But after that, when I was speaking with my team about the incident, it happened again. So then I realized, I better seek help. So I saw that therapist, and it was only one session. And quite hilariously, when I went to the session, she was recommended to me by a friend. So I told her, hey, just do for me what you did for my friend. Okay. In my mind, it's like, it's expensive, $220 an hour. can you give me the 10-step process so I can get over this? Like, fix me now, you know? But the thing is, I didn't realize, but I do now, that therapy is like working out for your mind. You don't just go to the gym one time and expect to be fit. So, I mean, anyway, just to cut a long story short, therapy was amazing. And other coping mechanisms I have is actually having like a community, people you trust. And sometimes your friends are the worst people to go to when you're going through a stressful period in your work, because I find that friends, well-meaning friends, want to give solutions, advice, or they try and dismiss it, and it's just not the best. So I've actually found, I started this year with the whole idea I wanted to have like a tribe, for lack of a better word, like a tribe of like-minded individuals. And it's not like there is a group of us, but I kind of meet with separate people and I know who to go to when I need certain things. So tomorrow, for instance, I'm having lunch with a 60-year-old Dutch entrepreneur. I mean, he used to own an airline, for instance. He'll be so flattered I mentioned him, but he is retired, you know, but he gives me a much needed perspective because I suffer from self-doubt, imposter syndrome, you name it, right? And if I go to my mom, which very often I speak to her, by the way, Joseph, I speak to my mom almost every day. But anyway, my mom is not my therapist. She's not trained, neither are my friends. So now I realize I need to go to people who are experts in their areas. So I go to my 60-year-old mentor because he started many businesses. I will go to Susan De Silva because she's very good about awareness, digging out your purpose. She's helped me do that. And one thing I think has really helped me thrive was unpacking my purpose. Like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? And Susan said it very well. She said, unpacking your purpose is like the sense of your own skin. It's almost undetectable. So to unpack that, to articulate that into words, it's actually very difficult. You might need a professional. And once I have my purpose, my mission, it makes everything so much easier because I can say no to things now. If it doesn't align with this, it's like, okay, if it's not a clear yes, I'm going to say no. So that has helped me.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good one. And I think leaning on coaches, therapists, getting help is really important. And I gotta admit for myself, like, yeah, sometimes like when I go to friends or my mom, I'm like, no, I just want you to listen. I don't want any advice. And what I love about going to therapists and coaches is that they're typically trained to help you find your own answers. And I think that's the most powerful, right? And you actually
Yeah.
like eventually listen to yourself somewhat. And they're also in a neutral position to call you out when you're, kind of like bullshitting yourself sometimes. So, Joseph, do you have anything else to add in terms of how, any routines, habits that you've got?
Sure. I mean, I'm similar to Tristan. I block out time in the calendar. I mean, I'm known to fill my calendar with fake meetings, so that I can have time to prepare if I need to prepare for something, or just take a mental break and do just collect your thoughts and reflect. I turn to fitness quite often. Exercise, go for a run, go do a yoga session, go do some training. Oftentimes, I try to incorporate that into a routine. It just, with my work schedule, it's difficult at times just because I work international hours, so things pop up here and there. But I tend to, instead of saying I need to go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I just say if I can just get 3 to 4 days a week. Doesn't matter when those 3 or 4 days come in. I make an attempt to, if I can say I hit 3 or 4 days a week, then I feel good. And then I have hobbies. I think doing things that you love, doing things that you enjoy are important in terms of dealing with stress. I do photography, and so coming to Singapore is a new scene for me to go explore. So that's been quite exciting to be able to try and do. And the funny thing is that oftentimes it's we go on vacation to get away from work and get away from stress and such. And but what I found is that sometimes if I go away on vacation, I start to get stressed because I don't know what's going on at work. and or am I missing something? And this gives me a lot of anxiety. And so actually what I do, and thankfully my wife.
Oh, I think I can't hear you, Joe. Is it me or Joe? Can't hear you.
Did I lose
Ah,
you?
yeah. Now we're
Okay.
good.
Yeah.
The previous sentence.
So yeah, I was saying that when I go on vacation, and my wife embraces this, that I actually take about an hour or 2 hours in the morning to read through email or just kind of check in on work, and because being able to be connected still at some point, relieves my anxiety for the day. Even though I know I'm on vacation, I just got to see what's going on, and then I can feel relaxed that if there's something urgent, I can address it. If not, obviously, wait, it waits. It can wait, but strange habit that developed over time, but I realized that was the best thing for me to do. Otherwise, I just never enjoyed being on vacation because I felt, disconnected and such. And that allowed me, having that flexibility has allowed me to be less stressed, overall. And but yeah, I just doing things that you like, I mean,
Yeah.
I find, I try to focus on that when, I feel like there's
Yeah.
how to deal with the situations, that are stressful.
Yeah, I think like what I'm getting from, I mean, and also same here on vacation stuff, when there's a lot of responsibilities and a lot of moving parts happening, it is quite stressful to just like break away from all of that. So I think like there's this whole topic of like work-life integration. How do you do both
Sure.
together in
Yeah.
a way that's sustainable for both sides, right? Um, and I think you also mentioned a lot about just doing very human things, right? And I think one of the things that was coming up for me as I was listening to you, all of you, was that simple things like having meals, having enough sleep, enjoying your shower time even, or yeah, just doing things that you enjoy, right? I think that's something that like those are things that give you energy, and that's also what gives you the ability to keep doing things that stress you out or keeps you or enables you to do your work at your best self, right? So maybe it's really just about carving out pockets of time to just be instead of do, right?
Right.
So maybe
For sure.
that's one of the important stuff. Tristan, you're muted. I'm wondering whether you wanted to share something.
Yeah, I just wanted to. So, Shulin had mentioned earlier, therapy is expensive, but I did want to provide a counterbalance that for people who are at larger organizations, they almost always have, and this won't be applicable for everybody, but for those who it is, they almost always have employee assistance programs where the therapy will be covered for free. And oftentimes academic institutions, if there's any students in undergraduate or graduate school, oftentimes those academic institutions also have programs where that therapy will be entirely free. So I just wanted to provide that as a counterbalance. It's of course not going to be applicable to 100% of people, but I do find that oftentimes people have no idea that the therapy is actually available to them for free.
Yeah.
So when I was at Morgan Stanley, it was available for me to free. BCG, C, all of these institutions, both in college and in graduate school, always free. So I'd say about probably 90 to 95% of the therapy that I've done throughout the course of my life, it was free and covered by the institution I was at. There was one point where I was at Morgan Stanley where I used up basically the maximum amount of free therapy they were willing to give me, and then I paid a little bit out of pocket. But yeah, so I would definitely, if you're at an organization and you're not sure, either either reach out to somebody within human resources or that's familiar with benefits and ask them the question, or if you feel uncomfortable doing that, given I recognize that for some people it can be a strong stigma and that might hold you back from reaching out. If you do feel like hesitant, then you can always reach out on behalf of other people at your, so say, hey, I have a colleague who's really stressed out and I'm just wondering, like they're curious whether or not these resources are available, what's available. And it can be a way of like anonymously reaching out, or if you have a mentor at the organization, you can ask them to send that anonymous message on your behalf. If somebody reached out to me at C and wanted to figure out a question, I would be more than happy to anonymously send a message to HR on their behalf. So there's ways to get the information, but it's definitely worth checking, because as Shulin mentioned, if you're paying for it out of pocket, you're paying $200+ an hour oftentimes. So if you can get your organization to sponsor that, definitely
Yeah.
leverage that resource.
I am sponsoring one of my team members to see the same therapist that I am. Yeah, because she's going through a rough time. And we have another colleague, unfortunately, her husband died of lung cancer in the midst of COVID. And she thought that she was fine, but as it turns out, she wasn't. And I had to learn a very hard lesson: when people say that they're fine, they might not be. And so I think a lot of it actually boils down to the manager, because like you said, Tristan, sometimes you might feel like, if I'm an employee, I don't want to raise my hand. What if my manager thinks that I'm not going to be able to do my job because I need help? So that actually prevents a lot of people from speaking up. So I think the onus should also fall on the manager to know, to find out, if something is off, our spidey senses are going off, then investigate, do something about it.
I think that's an important point. And what Tristan said is, these EAP programs, if you're in a big organization, or if you, managers and leaders, please, they're underutilized. They're underutilized, all the time in these in the organizations. And as a manager, you should be aware of what's available for your employees, so that you can offer that, as Shulin mentioned. And in Hong Kong, I was involved in a large business chamber where we got to interact with a lot of different companies of sizes. And one of the larger tech companies that were there, they noticed that the EAP was way underutilized. And what they did, they said, and you know what, we're going to bring all the EAP counselors into the office and set up scheduling, times for people to sign up. And what they found was that it was 100% booked for 5 days straight. And so definitely the need was there for employees to want to engage, but maybe bringing that in to raise awareness is a way to help drive the usage of that, because people want it, people need it, and obviously it's helpful, as you can attest with Tristan and Shulin here.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for bringing that up, Joe. I think you've shared this as well, and I thought it's very empowering and reassuring to employees who saw that initiative, right? Because they're like, okay, so now it's acceptable for me to just go for therapy. It's right here.
Right.
And you're so right in saying that there are, more often than not, there are employee assistance programs or EAPs within companies that are there. It's just that you've got to find out, right? Sometimes it's communicated, but it obviously gets lost amongst all the emails that you have. So if you are, wherever you are working right now, to the audience, go find out if you have free therapy. You might just have that. So maybe another question before we just jump into the Q&A. We have only time for a couple. But since we're on this topic, building off what you shared, Joe, how do you think leaders or managers can help, ensure that their teams are properly supported and that they can, thrive through that pressure?
Yeah, I mean, Sabrina, I take this to heart, and I think leaders and managers can have a big impact in terms of helping employees thrive, and it really does, one, awareness of the leader and manager that mental health is in awareness is important, and that it can be benefit to the organization to ensure that employees are well and can perform, and so take an active role. Managers and leaders need to take an active role in whatever means possible, whether you're a founder or whether you're in a large organization. There are ways to raise awareness and to engage with your employees, to assess that, whether it's you can do, we've done things like mental health first aid training, how to spot signs in the organization. That's something that, you can employ and roll out. But again, there's a lot of things that, as leaders that you can really take the initiative on, talk to your employees, find a way to engage with them regularly, make them aware of the programs that are out there, encourage them to join, organizations such as yours and, participate to raise self-awareness. These are the things that employee managers can actually influence, in an organization. A lot of times we like to do grassroots, employee up, but sometimes you need the support, you need to see the support of your leaders, that they're in the same page as you to feel comfortable to engage and to actually utilize these services. So I think it's highly important that managers take the initiative to make this an important priority.
Okay, so I have a question coming in here from someone in the audience, and this question is along the lines of, how do you bring up external stressors outside of work with your managers, especially if you don't trust that the company culture is going to be understanding enough? Like, for example, if the manager dismisses the conversation and says that the work should take priority. Maybe Tristan or Sholin. How would you?
Okay, so my team is all female. And we have a lot of family emergencies. I mean, like your child is sick, grandma, mother, everything. It all boils down to trust. And I tell my team, this is a trust bank, okay? We want more deposits than withdrawals. If at any point in time there's a withdrawal, it could be devastating to a relationship. And I'm very, very conscious of the fact that I want to be treated how I would have loved to be treated when I was still an employee. So I think it's difficult to answer this question because not all managers are understanding. And I think it boils down to knowing what are the potential backlash and political landmines when you communicate certain things. And like what Tristan said, actually, there are certain times when you can find out anonymously. If you're new to an organization, you don't know who to turn to, find an ally, right? And figure out, is this person going to be receptive if I say that my kid is sick, I need to go? And also, if you do have an emergency, tell them that you've taken care of work exigencies. What is your plan? Like, don't go to your manager just with the problem. Go to them with, a well thought out plan. And I mean, there are colleagues you can lean on. So I think that's pretty important to know that you have a support network. At the end of the day, a lot of employees, they want to know that there's this psychological safety thing going where their jobs are not at risk just because they take the afternoon off to attend to a family emergency. And more managers, more C-level people need to realize this. Unfortunately, I would say that as we get more and more senior, sometimes we might lose touch. We might have less empathy. And then this is where actually one thing I want to touch on is this is where reverse mentoring helps massively. This is something I've actually encouraged a lot of my clients to do. And the most successful head of teams, managers, they actually have someone much younger, Gen Z or millennial, telling them this is how they think.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point. So any managers out there can engage in reverse mentoring as well. It's really cool. Okay. So last question before we wrap up. All right. So someone in the audience has asked about reframing. So what are some small steps that I can take to start being better at reframing such thoughts towards stress and pressure? Maybe this is one for Tristan.
Yeah, so I think that reframing, and this definitely resonates, as I think I'm a natural optimist. So whenever I'm in down period, something that helps me is to do exactly what you're saying and try to reframe it. So for me, I think probably the biggest thing that I find very helpful as it relates to reframing has just been the daily journaling. So I touched on it briefly earlier, but maybe I'll delve a little bit more deeply into it. When I wake up in the morning, I make this the first thing that I do in the day. So before I check my inbox, before I check text messages, before I check anything, news, anything like that, I'll just step outside and I'll just write the first thoughts that come to my mind. I'll reflect back on some of the things that I've been thinking about previously. And where the reframing component comes in is especially when I'm reading things that I've written previously. So I think sometimes when I'm in the present, I might have a little bit more of a negative undertone. What I'll do when I'm actually looking back at what I've written in the past, I will ask myself, like, what's another way that I can look at this moment? And I kind of like nudge myself to really reframe anything. So I'll look at what I've written and I'll look specifically for things that are negative, and I'll nudge myself to rethink what I had written previously or reframe what I had written previously into something that's more positive. And there won't always, or it can be difficult to reframe some things that are very negative into positives, but I really do my best to do that as much as I can. So even if I take the most extreme example of something like death of a loved one, there's nothing you can do to necessarily turn back the clock and have a conversation that you wish you would have had with them. But the reframe in my mind is, okay, this is a reminder to me today to tell the people who are important to me how I feel about certain things, how I feel about them, how I appreciate them. And so sometimes a tragic moment can help make sure that the relationships you have in your life today are even better and healthier and so forth. So everything in my mind can be reframed into a positive. And what I found works for me is really writing it down and then reading it with a fresh pair of eyes, looking for things that are negative, and then forcing myself to reframe it into a positive. I found to be a very worthwhile exercise.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Tristan. Joe.
And just real quick on that, on the reframing piece, I tend to think of it as when we think of pressure, it's a threatening aspect. So, we tend to be, afraid and feel that pressure. So for reframing for me, I look at it as, how can I turn that into a challenge? I take that action and make it a challenge. So if there's a presentation or a project that you have to do, I kind of reframe to say, how can I make this the best presentation I've ever done? What can I do to make this the best project ever seen by somebody? And what steps do I need to do that? So, I kind of reframe that to kind of make it a challenge for myself to overcome that, and and you train your mind and you build this habit that I mentioned before, to reframe and you look at these threatening situations or these pressure situations as a challenge thinking, if you will, to reframe, and that way you can focus on the task rather than the outcome. Because when we get stuck on the outcome, then we start to worry, how's it going to end up? Just focus on what you got to do, reframe, and let's see how we can make this the best thing ever that we've done, and improve that.
Yeah, and I think what I'm picking up from both you and Joe and Tristan, like you and you, is that like you're asking yourself different questions to help you kind of like reframe your mindset towards whatever task at hand, right? So you're essentially being your own coach, but maybe along the way it's about also learning from your therapist and or coaches and other people that can also help you get there, and so that you eventually find or have these tools for yourself. All right, guys. It's kind of we've kind of overrun, so I'm just gonna end off on one last question for our panelists, and then we are gonna wrap up. So, last question: if you could turn back time to a very stressful moment, maybe 10 years ago, what advice would you give yourself? So, Shulin, would you like to go first?
Oh, okay. My advice is there is a purpose in everything. Even at my most stressful moment, when things don't go my way, it always eventually works out. I just need to keep the faith and keep going on.
Thank you very much. Tristan, your turn.
Yeah, I would say if I think about the peak stress moments, what I would go back and tell myself is don't wait until I have kind of stepped over the line, but at the very first indication that, I'm under too much stress, over communicate as much as I can to loved ones, and to the extent I feel comfortable, to my team as well, because I think the more people you bring into that moment and into the situation, the more support you can get to make it through very difficult times.
Thank you so
For
much,
sure,
Tristan.
for sure.
Yeah, for
And
sure.